All right, so let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys now. Um, what There we go. All right, so let's start off at the top. All right, so for you guys that might not know me, my name is Carlos Gonzalez. I am an English and ESL educator over at Dundee Crown High School. And then I'm also a part of the English leadership team at Community Unit School District 300. So I just have a little presentation on some possible text revisions that we could do for our ELA curriculum. So let's go over our agenda. So just like I said, for today, we're really going to be discussing text choices moving forward. I'm going to present my proposal on what we should do with text choices in the ELA classroom. We're going to go over demographics, mainly with our students at all three of our high schools at CUSD 300. Then we're going to talk about a little bit of the research, and then we'll go over the text choices and the rationales. And then I'll just end with like some recommendations and some next steps that we can take as a district to ensure that all of our students' voices are heard. Then those are just today's objectives. Same thing, but just in like today, here's what we're doing. So here's my proposal on text choices. This is from the DCHS, so the Dundee Crown High School ELA 11 educators. We as a team met together and we just felt that the Community Unit School District 300 English leadership team should seek to integrate culturally authentic texts which appeal to the students in our ELL and ELA classrooms by providing texts which are representative of the Hispanic, Latinx cultures for students who find themselves in these classes. And then just as an extension of this proposal, the ELT team should move forward and do this with the 300 level and the honors classes as well. What we're primarily going to focus on is I'm going to present this through the lens of a junior English teacher at Dundee Crown High School. We're going to go over our 4 units that we study and that we teach at the ELA 11 level, and then I'll also go over the text choices. We'll go over the current list or some of the texts that we do use just so that you can get a sample of what we are doing in our classrooms. But then you'll also see a sample of things that I have done and other teachers have done in their classroom to seek more invested writing and more invested students. So let's start off with like, what does our student population look like? These are the demographics for Community Unit School District 300. And first and foremost, what we should know is we have 3 high schools. We have Dundee Crown High School, Harry D. Jacobs High School, and Hampshire High School. Dundee Crown is the most populated. We have 2,500 students. And then along with that, if we divided our students based on race or ethnicity, Hispanic and Latino students are the most represented at our school. They're the highest number of students. We're at 62%, which jumped up a whole 10% from when I started there 4 years ago. Then the next largest group of students would be the white. It'd be 27.5% of students are white, 6.8% students are black, 2.5 are 8% are Asian, and 2.3 are 2 or more races. Harry D. Jacobs High School, which is across the river, has an enrollment of 2,000 students. And it's kind of flipped here in terms of the demographics. So 63% of students are white, 20% of students are Hispanic, 8.9 are Asian, 3.7 are 2 or more, and then 3.3% of students are black. And then finally, you have Hampshire High School, which is our more rural high school. We have an enrollment of 1,700 students. Again, most of the students at that high school match up as white. 22% are Hispanic, 8% are Asian, 3.2 are black, and 3.9 are 2 or more races. So the big takeaways that we should have from this is just that like each school does have a different makeup of students, and we need to make sure that the students are represented in their texts that they're reading. As you can see, we have a variety of students, and the most important thing that like we can really seek to do is to ensure that our texts are representative, and our students are seeing themselves in the characters, the ideas, the that are presented in the text. Move on to the next one. So now let's talk a little bit about what our frameworks look like. Um, Again, these are just for the ELA 11 curriculum, just because I'm primarily a junior English teacher. So I do want to preface with that statement first. However, I would like to extend this for ELA 9, ELA 10, and ELA 12. But this is just what the direction that I would like to see all of our frameworks moving forward on. So let's go ahead and just kind of look at our current units. So junior English is divided into 4 units, one for each quarter. Unit 1 would be the rhetorical analysis, which primarily delves into texts like Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, the Declaration of Independence. We use This I Believe essays, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, et cetera, et cetera. And like we start off with looking at texts that are found in the early American canon. And then our summative assessment ends up being the rhetorical analysis. So we tend to look at former SAT essays that students would have taken for the SAT, and essentially we have them practice at writing an SAT rhetorical analysis. We give them the writing test. Unit 2 kind of delves into this. We want to have them write a definition essay, which tends to lead us into kind of a more informative piece of writing. So for this unit, we use texts like The Crucible. We delve in more to the short story. So we talk about like The Story of an Hour, Young Goodman Brown. We also get into some historical documents like The Crisis, Song of Myself, Self-Made Man, and Cask of Amontillado. Again, we're all over on themes there, but at the end of the day, what we want the students to be doing is to define American identity using 2 or more texts, and those are some of the texts that they're given to choose from. Unit 3 ends up being a little bit more, it ends up being a novel study. So it's a literary analysis. The students are given an option of reading, or the teachers and students are given an option of reading The Great Gatsby, A Raisin in the Sun, The Grapes of Wrath, Their Eyes Were Watching God, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, all the stuff that we probably read in high school. And again, at the end of this unit, students should be writing an analysis essay, which talks about the American dream, and primarily we have to talk about characters, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, we get to Unit 4, and Unit 4, there's a little bit more choice with this one. It's the op-ed or argumentative writing. So the texts are really, we get access to New York Times, and teachers are able to use all the articles that they want, or depending on the teacher you are, you might give your students the freedom to look for their own texts, so stuff that interests them. And again, at the end of this, it ends up being a research project where students create their own op-ed. They find sources to support their arguments, and they build them. Pretty much using the skills that we build up towards Unit 4. So that's our current units. I know that was a lot. But what should our students be reading is really where I want to take the focus of this presentation towards. So again, these are possible revised text choices. These are things that I have used in my classroom, and these are things that I have seen success with in my classroom. I really want to stress that, because we don't have an official framework for the ELL supported English classes or ELA classes. We're told to differentiate the content and to use the same texts, but when I have students who have only been in the country for a year or two, some of the texts might not resonate with them. If we're talking about Lexile levels, the text might be above their Lexile levels. And so we oftentimes have to not only navigate that, but also just the fact that, if we look at some of the texts that I mentioned, they're primarily written by old dead white guys. So for this, one thing that one change that I would love to see with the text choices that are provided for our frameworks are, for Quarter 1, I would like to see a little bit more modern pieces of text. were tasked with analyzing rhetoric. And so I've used 4 of these speeches that I listed there, like A More Perfect Union by Barack Obama, The Kids Are Not All Right by Andrew Yang, Undocumented Yet Hopeful. All 4 of those are texts that I've used, and even though we kind of start off with like a "How did America get built" theme, um, this these text options that I've provided are created by people of color. One of the authors of the last speech is actually an undocumented student who identifies as one of the dreamers. So again, these are just some options that I have provided, but I have found more invested writing when I have ideas and themes that are talked about where our students are feel represented or feel that they can make connections with. I will say with quarter 2, the text options that I've provided, so Citizen Illegal by Jose Olivares, which is a collection of poetry. He's a Chicago author, and one of the biggest selling points I always tell my students is he actually helped Chance the Rapper write parts of his album. I think that's a very accessible book for our students, and it also allows them to see themselves, uh, especially at Dundee Crown, where we have 61% of our students who are Hispanic or Latino. This is about a Mexican American boy who grows up in the U.S. He speaks 2 languages, and he has to navigate through his family and society as they accept him or reject him. The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros is a classic. Also very accessible. It talks about a girl who is growing up in a Mexican household. So it talks about her experiences as a woman of color, and also as a child going into adulthood. Tesoro by Jessica Salgado is another collection of poetry, and again, very accessible texts. The poems in this collection self-image. They also talk about just her love life almost in a way, and so there's a little bit of diversity in terms of ideas that are presented there. Cool Salsa, another collection of poetry. There's just a variety of poets, so I didn't want to like list them. And then I also have Damn by Kendrick Lamar, where that's a hip hop album, but absolutely could we pull up the transcripts for some of the songs, analyze them, and essentially create a definition of identity. And then I also just the next 2 or the last text that I included is the Breakbeat Poets, Volume 4. It's called Latin Next, and that's just a collection of a variety of Latino or Latina writers that are that write about a variety of topics. So again, teacher's choice. You can kind of go into that book and pick out things that that resonate with you, or things that might resonate with your student. For quarter 3, because we our summative is about the American dream, presenting it through the light of Hispanic or Mexican immigrants would be a great move towards, as opposed to like The Great Gatsby, for example, because we have 2 options. So we have We Are Not From Here by Jenny Torres Sanchez and All the Stars Denied. Again, both of those are about Hispanic, Latino protagonists who are here in the U.S. We Are Not From Here is about, if I'm not mistaken, I may be confusing the 2, but it's about young people crossing over into the U.S., just kind of seeking life and life here. And then All the Stars Denied is about if I'm not mistaken, the protagonist is just her experiences as a Hispanic here in the U.S., coming from a Mexican American family of immigrants. Finally, quarter 4, I feel like is the only one that I feel like we shouldn't touch as much, just because, again, we do give the students a choice to find things that interest them. So I do want to maintain that for them. But aside from that, those are really my recommendations. And again, these are just some texts that I've provided. They are not the end all be all. They are just the ones that I feel like we could talk about moving forward. Oops. Let's do this. So let's compare texts. So if we look at our current text choices, one of the big things that'll stand out is like we don't really offer much representation. We have all of these great authors: Kate Chopin, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Arthur Miller, and even the founding fathers. All stuff that has a great literary worth, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't have any sort of diversity. I mean, if we look at F. Scott Fitzgerald, there are any time that a person of color is mentioned, it's usually with a racial slur, or it's Tom Buchanan, spouting off some racism towards his servants, or towards people, and like even ideas on intermarriage. So these current texts just give us a centric view of America through one lens, and this really should concern us, just because uh, the big issue is we have had children who grow up finding themselves out of any of our stories. They don't resonate with them. The protagonists are often, white, or they're male, they're straight, whatever it be, but they just don't see themselves in literature. Um, and again, I mentioned earlier about how Tom, one of the main antagonists of F. Scott Fitzgerald, um, kind of mocks his servants, or even the language that Fitzgerald uses to describe people of color is would be considered racist today. But again, it's not properly representing people of color. And finally, the last part is, our text should offer reflections for the students so that they have like a way to see outside of their own culture. So our students who are, for example, white, should be seeing outside of their culture. Our students who are um, who are black should be seeing outside of their culture. And again, it essentially defeats that ethnocentrism that's imparted subtly through these texts. And that's really why this should concern us. If we don't have these diverse texts, we're going to be going this way. Okay, comparison continued. So again, this text list that I provided isn't perfect, but again, it's the one that I've seen the most success with in the classroom. I've had students who just who click with it, and they can make very clear connections to their own personal lives. And more than anything, the voices in these texts are really just allow readers to emphasize with diverse cultures that are not typically in the literary canon. I mean, I mentioned earlier how Citizen Illegal, one of my favorite collections of poetry, is really just about this boy who grew up in Chicago, and wasn't able to relate to people in his classrooms, wasn't able to relate to the people in his household, because he was neither here nor there. And again, just a book that I'm passionate about. But aside from just that personal preference, it really just could be beneficial for students, not just in the ELL classrooms, where most of my students come from Latin American countries, from Mexico, but for students who are in the traditional ELA classroom. Again, you're going to see a little bit more invested students, because you are going to be providing those meaningful experiences. Um, and again, as teachers, we are agents of social change. We should be allowing our students to talk about concerns and parts of their lives that are relevant to them and only to them, not just ideas that we deem are important or noteworthy. And then the last thing too is just how reading is that form of self-affirmation. So I will just speak to this with Citizen Illegal. Again, one of my favorite collections of poetry, because when I read Jose Olivares' work, I don't see myself outside of that text. I see a person, a voice that sounds like mine, a boy who didn't fit in with his parents at home, or with his family from Mexico. But then when he went to school, he was the Mexican kid. So it just was it just was one of those books that when I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is about my life. So now let's get to the nitty gritty. So the research. According to the according to some of the statistics that I kind of like found, in the past year, we actually had 3,300 books that were published by Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Um, and again, that's that lets us know that these resources are out there. We can find these texts, and so that is something to be excited about, and that is something that we should be striving for as an English leadership team. And then the other part too, Walter Dean Myers in a New York Times article writes just that like books transmit values, and whether they're direct or subtle, we need to show we need to show students that there are a variety of people because you're going to have a variety of readers. Um, the idea is to expose students to as much as different groups of people and different cultures as you possibly can. And again, like we as a district should really be seeking these resources so that like we can be supportive of the students in our schools. Our current text selections don't do this, and so we really should be taking that on and really just be ingraining this idea and of transmitting empathy for people outside of your culture in order to combat and ethnocentrism. Again, some of the benefits of multicultural literature. So this is I have a couple ideas that are summarized from multicultural literature and young adolescents, a kaleidoscope of opportunity. But basically, what it sums down to is like we have to have students have they need to have a broader view outside of what is in their realm. Uh, Through literature, we can really just dismantle any of those biases and prejudices, especially when we're getting into the feet of those like first person narrators. We can really just grow to empathize with them and even the characters themselves. So we would really just be combating, any of those negative stereotypes, biases, and prejudices. And then finally, just having, again, like I think one of the most important things about multicultural literature is just having students see themselves represented in other works of literature, um and having it be just a part of the curriculum as opposed to like sending your typical English teacher out to find the resources. I think that as a collective we can do this and we can make this easier for the educators as more meaningful for the students. Oops. And then like, so where do we go from here? So the Cooperative Children's Book Center from the University of Madison, Wisconsin, does provide some resources, and there are actually two that I felt were very easy to navigate and are, I feel, a good starting point. So Rich in Color and Social Justice books are both resources where young adult books are reviewed and they're summarized for educators to look into and to see what would be relevant with their units. So take for example, I mentioned the two novels that I feel would be fantastic to read during quarter 3 of junior English, where we're talking about the American dream. So we see the American dream through a person who had immigrant parents, and now she's a citizen of the US. And then we also have the American dream through the eyes of a person who is seeking it by crossing the southern border. Um, just knowing that ahead of time and finding texts that fit into those units, using these resources would be just a good starting point. And again, it just is here to like kind of say like, hey, we can start here, and I would like to see this move on outside of just my classroom. I would like to see this in all classrooms. And then thanks. If you guys have any questions, just feel free to email me at carlos.gonzalez@d300. And then I do have some of the articles that I referenced here in this presentation. But otherwise, thank you very much. All right. me stop sharing. Okay. I hope that all recorded.